to begin this webinar this morning. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you wherever you are. Warm greetings from a very sunny and warm Italy. My name is Sybil Nelson. I am based at FAO, where I support climate change action in the agriculture and land use sectors. It's my pleasure to begin the webinar. Thank you for joining us. We have a very, sorry, can we mute them? Thank you. We have a very exciting and full program, so let's dive right in. I'm very honored to be able to introduce to you Ms. Rohini Kohli from UNDP. She will be giving us opening remarks. Ms. Kohli is UNDP's Senior Technical Advisor for Climate Change Adaptation Policy and Planning. Rohini, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sybil. And again, echoing your warm welcome to all, wherever you may be. We're very excited to welcome everyone to this webinar on effective collaborative action, which is organized by the UNDP and FAO support program, SCALA. If I might expand it, it's a scaling up climate ambition on land use and agriculture through the nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans. And this is in collaboration with the UNDP Green Commodities Program.
Hopefully turning that into a feature.
I just want to make sure, there are some colleagues that may be on other calls. Please, if you could mute your microphone. As mentioned by Sybil, I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for Climate Change Adaptation Policy and Planning at UNDP, and also I support the SCALA program. As reminded by the IPCC latest report, well, there are actually several reports. There's a report earlier this year on adaptation and vulnerability. And there's also been reports on food, agriculture, and land use. We know from these reports that these sectors face some of the greatest climate risks, threatening food security and livelihoods. But these are also the sectors which have a lot of potential to become the solutions for addressing climate change through actions for both mitigation and supporting adaptation to the negative impacts of climate change. Accelerating action within or through these nationally determined contributions and the national adaptation plans is crucial, and SCALA is part of the effort to support countries in translating these priorities, policies, and strategies into climate action. These climate challenges cannot be addressed by individual agencies alone, but only through a whole of society approach, placing particular emphasis on gender and social inclusion and private sector engagement across all activities. So yes, collaboration is at the core of SCALA, and our global operations are based on forging this partnership. So at the moment, the program leverages the FAO and UNDP comparative advantage to strengthen adaptation and mitigation planning. It benefits from the generous support of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, BMWK, through the IKI initiative. And it also collaborates with the Green Commodities Program team for this webinar and other activities of SCALA to try and to tap into additional expertise. Collaboration and partnership are also at the core of UNDP's 2030 vision for food and agriculture commodity systems, which is to transform food and agriculture commodity systems through partnerships, contributing to the recovery from COVID-19 crises by creating sustainable and resilient livelihoods along these what we call the FACTS supply chains, and preventing further zoonotic diseases from emerging. So the webinar is meant as a first step in understanding the key considerations for effective collaborative action for climate and other global agendas. We hope you'll find it useful for specific work in your own context and the issues you contribute to address. And building on the webinar, the SCALA countries under the program will receive further targeted training and support for enhancing collaboration. We will compile the lessons learned and share them broadly afterwards. So we invite you to reach out to us and share your own collaborative journey and lessons. In closing, I'd like to thank you once again for your interest in the webinar and your participation through it. I now give the floor back to Sybil.
Thank you, Rohini, for setting the stage. If we could go to the next slide, I just wanted to spend 2 minutes explaining a little bit more about who we are on SCALA to give some context for who it is that's hosting this event today together with the FACTS team. So as Rohini clarified, this program that's a joint effort between FAO and UNDP is called Scaling Up Climate Ambition on Land Use and Agriculture through NDCs and NAPs. We're funded by the German government and currently operating in these 12 countries. The program has the goal of starting with countries' NDC and NAP priorities and land use and agriculture, and bringing those towards a stage of implementation. We're focused on the enabling environment space, the policymaking space. So we want to translate these priorities and break down barriers to climate action to achieve real results. And through this, we are applying systems thinking, and we work primarily with the Ministries of Agriculture and Environment, promoting participatory measures, a strong emphasis on gender and social inclusion, plus the private sector engagement. And next slide. We're working today, we're talking about the effective collaborative action methodology. And we think this is a really important approach to breaking down the barriers that are getting in the way of going from the NDC and NAP planning phase to implementation. We think this ECA, as it's called, has a lot of potential to get to that implementation stage. What we're working on under SCALA are a bunch of different, addressing a bunch of different barriers in the planning and implementation space. So this includes limited generation and application of information, insufficient coordination and capacity for cross-sectoral planning, the low level of the integration of NDC and NAP priorities into national planning and budgeting processes, gender inequality and social exclusion in the decision-making space, as well as the insufficient identification of investments and scaling up of finance. And I think what cuts across all of these barriers that we're trying to address under SCALA is the fact that to make change happen, we need stakeholders working together, stakeholders from all different parts of the agri-food system coming together and contributing their strengths to making the change that's needed. So we're really delighted to be collaborating with the FACTS team, part of the Green Commodities Program, on this methodology, on this event today, which I'm sure will help us all learn a lot more and be a great opportunity to exchange ideas. So really happy you're all here today. And it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Sole Riestra, who is a training and learning advisor with the FACTS team in the Green Commodities Program. She will be today's moderator. And now, Sole, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sibyl and Rohini, for this amazing opening of the session, and for to the whole SCALA team for inviting us to join this session today and share a little bit about effective collaborative action, but hopefully to hear from everyone's experience, reflections, and insights, because that's what makes effective collaborative action live. You know, everyone's experiences, thoughts, and reflections. So welcome to today's session. This session is aimed at being participatory and engaging. We thought of it this way. So, you know, for those that can, we would encourage you to keep your video on, to make it interactive. So share your thoughts, your questions on the chat, open your mics and ask questions or share experiences. We're going to try to make it practical, a little bit practical. We know that it's difficult with a big group online, but still we've got some points in which we're going to ask for your input in different ways. And it is an introductory session. This is worth noting. More deep dive sessions will be offered. And as Rohini and Sibyl were sharing, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any particular need ahead of what we are going to offer after these sessions. So thank you very much. And Maria, if we can move to the next slide, please. So I've seen that some of our colleagues have already introduced themselves on the chat, and that's wonderful. We're going to do a quick check-in as well. And the reason why we do this is because check-in is a practice that we use a lot in effective collaborative action. And it aims at not only being able to introduce ourselves, but to show up to a session, a meeting, in a more than just transactional way, sharing something else about ourselves. And we're going to talk about this. What does it mean to show up as a whole person, and not necessarily jump directly into the transactional bit? So Please, if you can reintroduce yourselves with your name, your role and location, and also if you can please share one thing that you're really good at. We look forward to seeing all the talents and good skills that this group has. Bonjour. So if you can share on the chat, please, your name, your role and location. Hi, Theodore. Thank you so much for sharing. Fantastic. Hi, Roderick and Abhisek. Rimbensid. Fantastic. Damiano. Skills, strategy, wonderful. Cristina. Two Cristinas. Fantastic. We've got such a diverse audience. Thank you everyone for sharing. Alex, welcome. Thank you. Aniko, Nicola, Ahmad, Dr. Mohit Kumar. We've got an amazing, amazing diverse audience. So thank you for sharing. And please keep on doing so. Keep on doing so because it's wonderful to get to know a little bit about each other, although we might not necessarily have the chance to connect more today. At least we get to know who you are and where you're from, and hopefully hear from you throughout the session. Thank you. Good team player. I love that. Thank you, Bulani and Luisa. Excellent. So please, Maria, if we can go to the next slide. So what are we here for today? We're going to, in this hour and a half, go through what effective collaborative action looks like and what it could be in the context of SCALA. So collaboration for actionable and transformative climate solutions in NDCs and NAPs. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's needed. I'm going to share details about the methodology, effective collaborative action, the building blocks, what we call the essential practices. And we're going to move a little bit into practice as well. How do we do effective collaborative action? And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to offer you a series of questions, of guiding questions that can help you start the process. And you will receive that after this session as well as handouts. And then finally, we're going to talk about something called signals of change, which is a tool that we use within effective collaborative action as a way of identifying our departing point for collaboration and being able to monitor and measure change. And then we're going to do a final Q&A. So this is how our next hour and a half is going to look like. And now let's kickstart. And as I said, we want to hear from you in one way or another. And so in order to start, I was wondering if you could please share with me which of these images represents better your experience of collaboration. And if you can just type the number of the image, just choose one image and type the number, please, on the chat. And then if you, if any of you is brave enough to open your mics and share, thank you, Christina, 9, very interesting, 7, lots of 7s. If you want to share why on the chat or just simply open your mic and share what your thoughts are. I'm very curious about the 7. I'm wondering if any of the people that chose 7 can share with me a little bit about why did you choose 7? You can use the chat or you can just open your mics.
I may share, but
yes,
this is Fatima speaking. From a visual perspective, I think there's a tendency of thinking about collaboration in a very sort of, there's a combination of cooperation and also an element of competition, if you will, depending on where you sit, depending on the organization you're with, etc., because you all have our respective mandates, our intentions, our agendas, if you will. So just the visual of supporting and creating that enabling environment where you're actually encouraging and supporting a path forward, it was quite powerful to see, because I think sometimes it's not as explicit, if you will, in terms of how we actually encourage positive or fruitful collaboration.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing a very, very thoughtful reflection. And it's good to bring in that balanced perspective about collaboration, right? Because sometimes we tend to portray collaboration as just showing the positives and the nice things, but it's also a complex process in a way, and there's a lot going on. So thank you for putting it so so well articulated. I'm wondering, I saw and something that caught my attention, and please, Federico, Drogo, if you are able to share, if not, no worries at all, of course. You mentioned image 1 and 2, and that's a very contrasting combination. So I'm quite curious.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you, Maria. I think that effective collaboration entails both of activities, a moment in which we all are at the same time and place, and we share, but we also need time to, let's say, reflect on what happened in the group context and then go back. So I think this is the reason. Up to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Federico. Yes, indeed. And again, we're talking about, well, there's a wonderful idea around polarities, which is not necessarily opposing, but it's rather the contrasting elements, right? And that they tend to balance each other. So the work of the collective and the work of the individual. So yes, thank you very much. And lastly, I'm curious about, so Patrick shared he selected number 6. And yes, if you have any insights as to why you shared that picture, that would be lovely to hear.
All right. In my experience, there's usually this thing of overlapping, I would say, responsibilities in a way. The way I've often worked with other people and maybe with other organizations, particularly, I work for the government, and sometimes there's this thing where we are implementing a particular action, and another entity is also implementing sort of a similar action, but then there's not necessarily harmony there, where we are trying to complement each other's actions because there hasn't been much of communication and sharing of information. So we end up overlapping in the way we do things.
Yes, thank you very much. There's certainly a lot of overlapping that happens in collaboration in general, and especially in our field of work. So indeed, thank you very much. If anyone would like to share any other reflections, please feel free to take up the floor, and otherwise just share on our chat. Anyone else would like to share anything else? Fantastic, thank you very much. And as I said, if you want to share anything else on the chat in the meantime, we will continue with the presentation. And Maria, thank you very much. If we can go to the next slide. So let's start talking about effective collaborative action. I'm going to introduce, as I said, a little bit of the background of the methodology, how it came to be, the components of the methodology, and how we go about implementing it. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So when we think about collaboration for transformative climate solutions in NDCs and NAPs, together with the team, we really thought that effective collaborative action was very adequate to bring in, because particularly for the field of green commodities program, we work with food and agricultural commodity systems. And as you know, these are very complex systems, and we are facing a multi-dimensional crisis in our field. So climate change is definitely a major one. And we know that there's a vast research, and the community of practitioners knows that agriculture and land use sectors play a critical role in helping build climate resilience and mitigate climate change. So we need to find effective ways of bringing about that change. Why do we say collaborative? Because a new paradigm in agriculture production is needed, and climate change will increasingly add significant pressure and regionally impact differently on all components of food systems, undermining all dimensions of food security. So challenges cannot be solved by one person or institution alone. And why do we talk about action? Because we need to take action to minimize the presence and the impact of the environmental and social trends that we see, like hunger, diet-related disease, and a planet in the trajectory towards environmental degradation and entrenched smallholder farmer poverty. So we believe that it is in the combination of being effective, of doing collaborative work, and taking action that we are going to bring about the necessary sustained systems change to the implementation of NDCs and NAPs. If we go to the next slide, please. Now, effective collaborative action is not a methodology that's been thought of in a theory vacuum. It's actually been built over 10 years of experience with national commodity platforms supported by the Green Commodities Program. And this experience goes all the way through 13 different countries over the past decade, including 8 agricultural commodities like cocoa, palm oil, pineapple, coffee, cashmere, beef, soy, and fisheries. 16 national commodity platforms were supported, out of which 13 are still alive. 15 subnational commodity and dialogue platforms have been supported, and 10 national action plans are finalized, out of which 4 have been legalized, and 8 subnational action plans were finalized, out of which 1 was legalized. So there's a lot of experience that's brought into how this methodology was put together, and experience focused on our fields of work. Now, for all of that experience that we've gathered, and Maria, please, if we can go to the next slide, we've gathered some lessons learned. There's 10 lessons learned that you can access on the report called Palm Oil and Pineapples and Partnerships. There's 10 key lessons highlighted that we've been using for upgrading our ways of working and developing this guide. But for the purposes of today, I would like to bring your attention to 3 key lessons learned, which I believe are at the heart of effective collaborative action. So if we go to the next slide, these 3 key learnings are that, first of all, complex systems demand more than technical solutions. And this is a little bit what we've started talking about at the beginning, where we say that We know what needs to be done from a technical point of view, and yet we're not seeing the change at the speed and level that we want to see. So the second key lesson learned in relation to this is that to achieve deep transformation, we need to focus much more on people and relationships, what we call the who and the how, and combine this with technical solutions. And lastly, the third lesson learned is that deep transformation of our food systems requires us to all to continuously change. So it's not the responsibility of one sector or the other. It's a collective action. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what we are saying from effective collaborative action is that we need to be working at the intersection of individual, collective, and system transformation as the sweet spot to accelerate our impact and progress, finding the right balance between the what, which are the technical solutions, so not rushing to only what needs to be done from that perspective, but also bringing in what we call the how, which are the ways of working and processes, particularly participative, inclusive relationship building, and the who, paying attention to the personal inner development of facilitators, conveners, and participants. So this is in a nutshell how we've came about effective collaborative action. And before diving into the methodology, I would like to ask you, please, if you can share your insights. And Maria, please, if we can go to the next slide. How can collaboration help us achieve transformative systems change towards a more sustainable future? And if you can share a few words that resonate for you regarding this question. And Maria, if you can stop sharing your screen, I'm going to start sharing mine so that we can see people's responses live. Thank you very much. So I'm going to share here the Mentimeter, which is live. How can collaboration help us achieve transformative systems change towards a more sustainable future? Please, if you can go to menti.com and use the code 53036801. Let's get some of those responses in. You can share your words, what comes to mind to respond to this question. And I'm gonna share my thoughts as well. I think we've got someone on the chat. Yes, thank you. It's menti.com, code 53036801. Perfect, thank you. We've got the first answers coming. That's wonderful to see. So we've got private sector engagement, and we're going to talk about private sector engagement actually in a little while. Buy-in, inclusiveness, partnerships, resource sharing, comprehensiveness, long-term partnerships, multiply impact, empowerment, connect, mindset, efficiency, cross-sectoral thinking, diverse perspectives, bring ideas together, multidisciplinary, empowerment, fantastic, inclusivity, knowledge, prioritize, habits, efficiency, we already said that, alignment, win-win situation, information sharing, reduced duplications, common understanding. Fantastic. Thank you to everyone that contributed. We've got one more question. So this is, in a nutshell, our collective thinking about how can collaboration help us achieve transformative systems change towards a more sustainable future. Now, the next question is, let me go back. What gets in the way? And you can use the same code. And this is more of an open text question, so feel free to share. Yeah, silo thinking, definitely. Language barriers. That's a very good point. Yeah, cultural barriers also could be. Join a community, too much hierarchy, too much work, hidden interests, gatekeeping, power relations, lack of resources and time, separate planning. No one is left behind and there is progress in collaboration, competitivity. Ego, diverse expectations, different understanding, cultural differences, lack of data, knowledge products, different interests, less capacity, financing, hierarchy, power relations, not having the same goals, objectives, resources deficiency, intolerance, yeah, willingness, vested interests, conservatism, project-based approaches, yeah, short-term perspective, lack of formal agreements for benefit sharing, organizational mandates, branding, shrinking space, yeah. Multi-crisis context, lack of communication and engagement among stakeholders hamper the transformation, yes, indeed. Lack of political will, institutional arrangement, individual, institutional priorities and goals. So there's a lot that gets in the way as well. And it's good to bring this up and to have it present in our minds, to be aware of it. Lack of political solutions to complement the technical solutions, funds, short-term, long-term goal setting. Yes, fantastic. Definitely. Thank you very much to everyone that's contributed, and we are going to share this as well for you to keep in mind. I think these are good reminders for all of us of why it is necessary. Why do we keep investing our time and our efforts in bringing about collaboration in our work, and also the challenges that we face, which are not minor. So thank you very much. And Maria, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to let you share the presentation back. In the meantime, if there's any reflections, any thoughts that you want to share about what we just done and discussed, please feel free to open your mic or just type in on the chat. Maria, thank you for sharing your screen. We will go back to the presentation in a minute. And so if you have any questions, any thoughts, any ideas that you want to share in the meantime, as I said, feel free to share them on our chat box, and we will address all questions as we go, or we can park them depending on the topic for later on. But I guess one of the things that we can say already from what we've seen so far is that collaboration is not always easy. And as soon as we go back to the presentation, we will share a good image of something that represents that very well, I think. Very good, having a shared collective vision, which whichever one buys into can make a difference. Yeah, indeed. Which everyone buys into. Yes, that's right.
Sorry, this is Rohini. Just trying to see if Maria is online. I don't know if she's, I don't see her. So maybe.
Oh, okay.
No, I think she's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. I can share my screen in the meantime. And yes, Maria, thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And if you can share it on full screen, perfect. Thank you. So as I was saying, and thank you for sharing your insight on having a shared collective vision, because it links very nicely to how we're going to continue the presentation today, which is, as I was saying, collaboration is not always easy. And we need to bear in mind that we can have very different perspectives looking at the same thing, as the images are trying to reflect. So how do we create a shared vision, and how do we work together beyond what may separate us? Because it might not be possible to get everyone to see things the way we see them. So how do we work in this diversity of thinking and in this diversity of perspectives? So Maria, thank you. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So effective collaborative action for transformative climate solutions wants to bring what we call deep collaboration, which is going a few levels deeper into the practice of collaboration to strengthen the commitment and individual and collective drive to sustained action. Bring all the relevant voices to the table. And Maria, whenever you have the chance to move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Address complex challenges from different perspectives and bring some structure whilst keeping the collaborative efforts open to emergence and adaptation. So it's about dealing with the complexities, the challenges that you've been talking about already through the Mentimeter questions. So now we're going to move into the methodology as such and the different components. Maria, I'm not sure if you're there, if you're able to move to the next slide and one more, please.
So Leigh, I think maybe Maria's having some issues, so maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and pull up the slide for you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Sounds great. Thank you. Yes, so as I was saying, we're going to now move into looking at the components of the methodology, the different building blocks, the different elements that make this methodology what we've been talking about so far. If you have any questions or any reflections, feel free to share them on the chat. And we will move now into exploring the methodology.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
No problem. Thank you, Shanali. Thank you very much.
No
and I've
problem.
posted a question on the chat as well in the meantime. So just for us to think about, when we go through the methodology, it's good to think about an experience that you've had on collaboration, particularly a good or a bad experience, but any experiences that you've had with collaboration, if you can have them on the back of your head. Think about what made that collaboration work, what made it challenging. If you're thinking of an example where things didn't work out, think about why those things didn't work out, and how does the methodology might respond to those challenges or to the good practices that you used. So this is a visual of how effective collaborative action methodology looks like. Now, I'm conscious that it's a little bit busy, so we're going to take it apart and focus on the key elements of this methodology. So we mentioned previously how effective collaborative action seeks to help us work at the intersection of individual, collective, and systems transformation as the sweet spot to accelerate our impact and progress towards systems change, finding the right balance between the what, and those were the three circles, which are the technical solutions, the how, which are the ways of working and processes, and the who. So paying attention at the personal development of facilitators, conveners, and participants. So if you remember those three circles that we were talking about. And so in order to do that, the methodology has been structured into 4 building blocks, which are the circles in the middle, and 3 key elements to consider. The 4 building blocks are understand the system, co-create the approach, take collaborative action, and learn and adapt. So the 4 circles in the middle. Besides these 4 building blocks, the methodology has 3 key elements, what we call stakeholder actions, which is what you can see at the top and at the bottom. So this outer circle. And stakeholder actions refer to the things that individuals or groups need to do and know how they need to engage to the project. So we have a very specific and deep dive look at stakeholder actions. And then what we call backbone support, which, as you can see, is the concentric circle that's closer to the building blocks. And these are the foundations in terms of resources and tools required to support the project or initiative that you might be working on. Now, at the corner, at the top right corner, there's what we call the 4 essential practices. And these are quite key, because what we've observed is that collaborative methodologies tend to focus on the process of collaboration, which we could say is the circle, the circles in the middle. And what we try to bring with effective collaborative action and the 4 essential practices is to weave in the more relational dynamics, the things that happen as we collaborate, the challenges that we've been talking about. And these are, we've organized them into 4. These are the areas of focus in terms of skills, personal and group development, and awareness, what we need to pay attention to. So we talk about build a systems leadership capacity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. Work with power, and some of you mentioned power as something, power dynamics as something that gets in the way. Work through conflict and effective communication. So these are the 4 essential practices. Let's move a little bit further into the building blocks. So if we go to the next slide, thank you very much. As I said, we've got 4 building blocks: understand the system, co-create the approach, take collaborative action, and learn and adapt. These building blocks represent an important area of work needed to bring about systems transformation. And these building blocks are not meant to be worked on in order necessarily, but rather worked on and prioritized as needed depending on each project or intervention. So whenever we are advising a platform, let's say that's already been in place and it's quite mature for a long time, we might focus on the learn and adapt building block. How do we help that platform move into, evolve, progress, capture their learning, understand what they need to change, and not just continue working out of inertia. When we start a new project, a new initiative, we might start by understanding the system, learning what it's about. We're now advising a project in Peru, for example, and at a subnational level. And although the project has been going on for a while, we are still doing a phase of understanding the system because we feel it's quite important to capture that understanding in some kind of shape or form that's written that we can then go back to in time. So it's a very flexible methodology and a very flexible approach. Now, if we go into each one of the building blocks, understanding the system is about developing awareness of the different parts involved in, say, an initiative, a project, a dialogue, or a platform. And what are the connections and interactions between these different parts? It is also about understanding what the current situation is, what needs to change, and where the leverage points for change might be. The second building block that you can see on screen, co-create the approach, refers to designing visions, plans, and pathways for change, including key stakeholders' voices, views, and needs. So not all stakeholders need to be involved in the same way necessarily, and understanding who needs to be involved and how is also part of this building block. Take collaborative action highlights the importance of working together and taking action to bring change in the food systems that we work with. And finally, the learn and adapt building block recognizes that systems change is ongoing and it's a dynamic process. There's nothing that's written in stone. So there are no copy-paste solutions or magic recipes for success. Making sure that we learn as we go, that we stay flexible, that we adapt our course of action based on the feedback that we receive from the systems and stakeholders involved is definitely crucial. So these are the 4 building blocks. And I would like to pause here for a minute and ask for your input. So thank you, Filomena. Important to have a clear understanding of roles and contributions in any collaboration, and critical to have strong leadership. Indeed, those are certainly essential elements to any collaborative action. And I'm wondering from the group, because obviously you all have experience in collaborative efforts, which one, to your perspective, which one of these 4 building blocks do you feel is the most important one? And please, if you can just type it on the chat, or you're more than welcome also to share, to open your mics and share your views. Which one of these 4 building blocks do you feel is the most important one? Reem, thank you. Number 1. Rohini, number 2, co-create the approach. Thank you. Would you like to say something else about that, Rohini?
Yeah, thank you, Soleil. Actually, I think maybe the reason I chose that is because, sort of having, clear understanding of an ownership of trying to work together is extremely important, and from A to Z, because, people get involved in consultative process sometimes, and then they are no longer consulted when it actually comes to the point of something getting crystallized. So co-creating the approach right from the beginning is important. And I think co-creating should also be, clear that there is a lot of power differentials involved in certain things. Often the way this kind of activity is there's often a lot of competition to get to a certain point. So I think co-creation has to also discuss the issue of competition and dealing with conflict, because at the end of the day, pure collaboration does not always result in getting an initiative going. There's a lot of conflict that happens, or competition, let me put it like that. So I think just agreeing on a co-creating approach is important, because it's not all roses all the way. So that's why. Back to you.
Indeed, thank you very much. And I think Patrick raised his hand. Yes, the floor is yours.
Yes, I feel like steps 1 to 3 are very key, but if I have to go for one, then I would choose 2, because I feel like that's where you set the ground rules, and you establish the necessary strategies for you to actually work together. This is where you can actually agree on what you want to achieve individually, as components of one unit, but also as a collective. So 2 will clearly guide you on how you have to go forward, and how whatever fallout comes from poor collaboration can be viewed, can be, I would say, maybe projected from from this step.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, definitely. There is from a systems change perspective, in the co-create the approach, there's momentum, right? There's a lot of momentum, and I can definitely see what you and Rohini are saying in terms of why you feel this is the most important building block. Yes, indeed, Mohit and Never, all are vital, definitely, since they're all building blocks. Yes, indeed. And I'm curious, someone Neha is mentioning number 3. Would you like to elaborate? Because we've covered 1, we've covered 2, and if we can have some inputs on why 3 is quite important, which obviously we agree. Neha, would you like to share a little bit more, if that's okay with you?
Yeah, happy to share. I think all approaches are relevant at different stages, and sequentially or layering of these approaches is quite pertinent depending on the need. But I feel 3 is quite important from a transformational perspective, particularly for climate action, largely because often we tend to do, whenever we're doing collaborative things or co-creating things, we have the risk of falling into a trap of doing business as usual and things which have worked in the past. So we try those actions, but we don't experiment or innovate or go beyond our comfort zone. And taking a collaborative action which helps us to also experiment our way forward together is something which is quite needed for transformational changes, which is needed for climate action particularly. But I'll stop there.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And there's something about experimenting that you mentioned, which is quite key. How do we pilot different things? How do we keep it open? Experimentation in collaborative action is definitely a crucial bit of it. And sorry, I don't have the full name, but F. Rajabali, you mentioned 1 and 4. So would you like to elaborate around 4? Why 4? And integrated learning definitely also informs what needs to change, be adapted. So would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Thanks, Maria. I suppose one of the learnings that we're trying to also is part of also evolve our work evolving is that increasingly, by actually not just learning and capturing the learning, but actually integrating the learning into the work itself, into the programmatic work, or even into our vision, actually totally transforms the way that we even approach things. So whilst all of these are critical building blocks, I think there is a shift in how we talk about learning now increasingly, and it's really exciting to hear more about not just capturing learning for learning's sake, but actually doing something more than just learning. What does it actually mean in terms of changing the work that we're undertaking in order to meet the objectives or goals that we have?
Fantastic, thank you. And yes, integrating learning, as you were saying, is definitely a crucial practice that we are bringing in through effective collaborative action. Do you have any experience of doing this already? And can you share a little bit more? Because it is something that's been talked about for a very long time, but as you very well point out, not necessarily done on a regular basis. It's not embedded in our ways of working, right?
Absolutely. And just one example that I'm currently in the process of trying to facilitate internally in the program that I work in is that requires buy-in, not just from the people involved, but also those that have actually conceptualized what needs to happen. And that includes senior management. So, somebody mentioned a bit earlier about there needs to be a kind of a shared spirit in terms of moving forward, but it also requires buy-in from a lot of other layers of management within an organization or within a work program. And that is part of a process as well, because it means that we constantly have to change the way that we work. And that isn't always very comfortable.
Yeah. Indeed, definitely. And I would like also to bring us back to some of the challenges that we talked about in regards to collaboration. And we talked a lot about time and workload and how we often see that this bit of learning gets relegated, right? Gets put at the bottom of the pile, basically. So that is also a habit and a dynamic that needs to be broken, or, we need to reframe. So yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. And then lastly, understand the system. I believe we haven't talked about that one. So anyone that chose number 1 would like to say something. I can see Theodore, Danielle, Ibrahima. What would you like to say about 1? Why is it so important? Reem, Min, please, the floor is yours.
If I may, actually, 1 is very important, actually, because it determines actually all the other stages. That means that if we understand the system adequately and properly, we will be able to come up with an adapted approach, and also to take the collaborative action with the appropriate stakeholders, not all of them, because of course we need to identify the relevant ones, and also understanding the system, will underpin, how we will adapt, to the context, to the situation.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Reem. And Theodore, I can see that you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just happy to share. I think the initial point where we start from is that we are coming together to solve a problem. So we must know what the problem is first in the first instance. So by understanding what is going on, what are the processes, what are the sub-processes going on, we better know. We are in a better position to group people together to have the solution, and in a long-term aspect, not the short-term aspect also. So understanding what is the sub-processes that is going on within each sector, each unit will be a better, you will be in a better position to have a a long-term solution instead of just a short-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Theodore. And definitely you are, and Reem as well, pointing out to the fact that understanding the system is the basis, right? This is where we lay the ground of and mark the territory that we're going to cover. So having a shared understanding of that is quite crucial. And I've facilitated a number of what we called effective collaborative action exploratory sessions for some projects, particularly scoping projects. So projects that were not initiated yet, but we're in the process of being of writing the proposals. And we gathered the work team, and we did an exercise, a 3-hour exercise of systems mapping, where we collectively mapped the different elements of the system, the connections between them, identified the key stakeholders, and did, as you very well say, Theodore, a visioning exercise of, you know, what is our vision of success and what are the key challenges that we feel we're going to face. And this was at the foundation. And then they kept on, as they progressed in the design of the project, they kept on feeding that. They kept on feeding the systems mapping. They kept on feeding the stakeholder analysis. They kept on feeding the vision of success and the challenges that they were facing. So in a way, and they kept going back to that. That was their starting point. That was, as I say, their territory. So it's very, very crucial and important, not only to do this exercise, but I would say to capture it somewhere where the group, the working group, can go back to. So thank you very much. Filomena, thank you for your contribution. Any additional thoughts or insights that anyone would like to share before we continue? Please feel free to take up the floor. Thank you, and I'm very pleased to see, and Filomena, your comment actually is wonderfully done, because as we said, you're already starting to take the methodology as you see it and making it your own by choosing and selecting which one is the most important one that you feel you would focus on, by, as Filomena is proposing, to say, you know, I would start from 1 and 4 and then move into 2 and 3. All of these ideas and flexibility is welcomed, and it's the essence of the methodology, that you take it and you make it your own. But of course, one of the key things that we are asked when we bring the methodology to our colleagues and to the people that we work with is, how do I start? I can understand the flow, I can understand the building blocks, you know, how do I translate it into action, right? And so what we offer are these questions to guide our reflection on the process and kickstart the use of the methodology. And we've compiled a number of trigger questions that can be used to spark the thinking and the work around each component of the methodology. And there is a more comprehensive list of questions that I will share with you in a minute. But most importantly, because we're not going to go through each and every question today, you are going to receive these questions as a handout that you can use yourself already after this webinar to start playing and experimenting with the methodology. So in terms of, just to give you an example, some of the questions, the trigger questions, as you can see on the screen, for understand the system is which are the systems and subsystems involved, what needs to change, and some of the practices, as I said, can be systems mapping, stakeholder engagement analysis, so identifying the stakeholders, marking them in terms of importance or relevance as to how close they are to the project and how distant they are. So obviously, depending on that, there's different ways of engaging the stakeholders. Not everyone needs to be engaged in the same way. If we go to co-create the approach, questions around how are we going to go about working together, what is enabling or blocking participation and inclusion of all critical stakeholders. We also talk about how do we make this shared vision, as you pointed out. Take collaborative action. What is our action plan moving forward? Very important to have actions identified. And how are we gathering input and feedback from insiders and relevant outsiders in terms of the actions that need to be taken and how effective these actions are being? And then learn and adapt. How are we capturing learning on an ongoing basis? And to the points that we were discussing earlier on, how are we integrating this learning on an ongoing basis? What needs to change and adapt from the original plan? So if we go to the next slide, thank you, Shanali, sorry. 4 building blocks, again, the questions, this is the more extensive list of questions. As I said, we're not going to go through them in detail, but just to show you that they exist and that they're going to be made available to you after this webinar. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. What I want to bring to your attention here is that we've got 2 sets of different questions. One question is about the process. How do we walk through, or how do we implement each of these building blocks? Now, the other set of questions has to work on the self-awareness of the facilitator and the convener. And if you remember, when we talked about the 3 circles, we said that self-development is very important in how we bring about effective collaborative action. So many of these questions are related to keeping ourselves in check of how we are conducting that or leading or executing that collaborative process. So just to share a few examples, in understand the system, what do I already know about the systems involved? What feels important to know? What am I assuming about the systems involved? So, you know, having a good check at our own assumptions and biases. If we look at co-create the approach, asking myself as a facilitator and a convener, how am I creating safe spaces for stakeholders to work together? How am I encouraging stakeholders to come together to a common vision? What parts of me are getting in the way? What parts of me are helping? You know, in the way that we set up spaces, in the way that we invite people to come in. How do I bring trust to the table? All of these things are very important to keep ourselves in check. And the questions here aim at helping us do that on a regular basis. If we go to the next slide, please. I would like to now bring your attention to what I called the essential practices in the context of the methodology. So the 4 building blocks, I think, are the process, right? How do we create and execute and build that collaborative process? The essential practices, as I said, are sort of the dynamics, the ongoing dynamics, and the skills that we need to build to navigate through those dynamics. So I always say, for me, the building blocks are the ship, the vessel, and the essential practices are the water in which that vessel has to navigate. And obviously that water can be very shaky, and you know, it can turn the vessel upside down. So it's up to us to make sure that we know the sea that we're navigating through. So the 4 essential practices, as I said, are the areas of focus in terms of skills, personal and group development, awareness, things that we need to pay attention to. And we talked about build a systems leadership capacity, work with power, work through conflict, and effective communication. So systems leadership, what we are saying here is that to radically transform food systems, we need a type of leadership that works with complexity, that can see the whole picture and understand that leading in this context is not about providing unilateral decisions or fixes, but rather empowering people to actively participate in constructing this change together. It is also about leading in the understanding that change in complex systems happens inside out. So we need to work on our personal development, as I mentioned before, and the guiding questions on self-reflection are meant to help with that, to then be able to work on the groups and the collective development. And bringing in this inner dimension, this individual dimension also to our stakeholders. And this will translate into systems change. Because after all, as we always say, systems are not alien structures, they're made out of people. So, if we are able to transform ourselves individually, then from that we can grow into group and collective change. Now, working with power means to become aware, notice and understand the underlying individual and group dynamics that might enable or hinder certain individuals or groups from showing up fully and participating in an event, a process, a dialogue, a platform, or a project. So who gets to sit at the table? The rhetorical table. Who doesn't? And at the table, who gets to speak and who doesn't? What are the underlying cultural, social, organizational traits that feed these dynamics? And how do we create a space for equitable participation? Then working through conflict goes hand in hand with power. The idea is to, rather than trying to minimize or hide under the carpet, conflict needs to emerge so that it can be worked on and with. Otherwise, the conflict in itself doesn't go away, and the elephants in the room are still there. So unless they are addressed, collaboration can only go as far. So managing and facilitating conflict is a key aspect of effective collaborative action. And then finally, effective communication. We all know how crucial good communication is for any aspect of life, personal and professional relationships, teamwork, leadership, organizations, institutions. And for communication to be effective, it's not just about what we say and how we say it, but also, and many times, most importantly, how we listen. So for us, addressing communication systemically means to work as much on how we communicate at personal, collective, and systems level, meaning how we express what we need to express, but also how we listen to the different parts of the system. And finally, the other two elements, if we go to the next slide, we talked about stakeholder actions and backbone support. And these are some of the guiding questions to look into the stakeholder actions. So who are all the stakeholders touched by this project? Which ones are the most critical ones? How do they need to get involved? What does the project need from each stakeholder? As I said, we're going to share this with you so that you can have a deeper look. And there are some key tools that you can leverage on from our toolkit: guidance on stakeholder engagement, private sector engagement guide, stakeholder mapping template, and so on and so forth. And the same for backbone support. I'm seeing a comment from Aniko. How could we get this capacity building tools? So all of this is going to be shared with you, and there's access, there's online access to them. So we are going to send an email after this session with all the links. And Aniko, please, if you have any questions after that or anything that you feel you would like to access to that might not be covered by that email, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you. And if we go to the next slide, please. These are some of the guiding questions to guide reflection on the process of looking into the essential practices. And as I said, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but just to say that they are made available and they can help you walk through each one of the essential practices and see how to work with them. So, just as an example, if we look at working with power, we have some questions around how aware are stakeholders about the unconscious or conscious power dynamics being displayed? Where are the power misbalances? How do they manifest? How can I establish a power with dynamic instead of a power over, and so on and so forth. So yes, feel free to have a look at these questions in your own time and in connection to your work, so that they become alive for you. And well, this is a walk through the methodology, and I'm going to now pass on the mic to Siobhan, who's going to share with us a good example of how effective collaborative action has been applied in practice for SCALA. So Siobhan, over to you if you're ready. And thank you very much for putting together this wonderful case study.
Thank you, Sole, and hello everyone. My name is Siobhan Kibria, and I'm one of the private sector engagement focal points for the SCALA program. And I'll be talking through an example, as Sole mentioned, of how the ECA approach can be applied by highlighting how it actually has helped inform SCALA's private sector engagement approach, particularly on mapping and outreach. The SCALA team has in fact recently developed a guidance document on private sector mapping, outreach, and engagement planning. And many of the elements have drawn from some of the building blocks that Sole has recently gone over of the ECA approach. So the SCALA guidance has three main sections, beginning with identifying and mapping private sector actors. And this section is really strongly aligned with the understanding the system pillar of the ECA approach, and involves understanding the private sector landscape and mapping actors within the system based on initial consultations and also secondary desk-based research. The next section of the guidance, which is around prioritizing and segmenting different private sector actors, also draws from the first pillar of the ECA approach, and particularly focuses on getting a more detailed understanding of individual actors to prepare for engagement. This includes, for instance, developing a profile focusing on the relevance and the contribution potential of different actors to meet SCALA goals, using consultations, interviews, and secondary research to develop these profiles. And once this is done, private sector actors can be segmented and prioritized, making it easier to later craft specific engagement strategies and customized engagement strategies for them. And here I want to point out that the guidance encourages drawing from the learn and adapt pillar from the ECA approach, as initial consultations should and will lead to reassessments on how different partners can or want to contribute under the SCALA program. Moving on, finally, the third section of the guidance supports the development of engagement plans, which should be informed by the prioritization and segmenting in the previous section. And here we loosely adapt many different elements suggested by the effective collaborative action approach, including whether to inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or co-create with potential partners. We also touch upon the other two pillars of the approach here, including co-creating an approach with different actors and also taking collaborative action in developing a tailored engagement plan and beginning to work together jointly on jointly held climate action goals. Finally, we again draw from the learning and adapting pillar as we iterate, validating and updating the engagement plan as different collaborations progress. So very briefly, I hope I've given participants a practical sense for how this very rich and varied ECA approach can be applied. As you can tell, we've picked certain sections, given how modular it is, and demonstrated the flexibility of the ECA approach and how we have adapted it for the purposes of SCALA's engagement with the private sector. Thank you very much, and back over to Sole.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. And I'm wondering if there are any questions or comments that anyone would like to ask, any reflections, taking the opportunity that we have Siobhan here on the floor, on the virtual floor. Yes. Sorry, we've got your first letter of your name.
Yeah.
F.
It's Fatima.
Fatima.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fatima.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this case study, and really interesting to see how it's actually kind of actualized. I'm curious, in terms of bringing together actors who might otherwise not have interacted with each other or engaged with each other as part of the development of your engagement plans. To what extent do you incorporate the kind of trust building sort of process within that? And what does that actually look like? I mean, from your respective experience, what did that look like? Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much for the question. A very good question, in fact. In terms of the program right now, I'll say that we're still in the opening stages where we're still reaching out to different private sector actors, but certainly from past experience and from what we expect in the future, I think a big part of this developing the engagement plan is getting all these stakeholders to the table, including government partners, civil society organizations, private sector partners, understanding what their different priorities are, and seeking overlaps, and by doing that, figuring out how we can move forward together. So I think that piece of facilitating these multi-stakeholder engagements and meetings and collaboration, that's a crucial part of it. And I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Yes, and just to complement Siobhan's points, actually, you've raised, Fatima, an excellent question, and facilitating trust and building trust is such a key and important practice. And we're going to share a little bit more about that. We're actually focusing on that theme at the moment. What are the practices that can help facilitate trust? But certainly that needs to come in as early as possible. And as we say, that's part of the sea that makes your ship go in the direction that you want it to go and in the way that you want it to go, in a way. Otherwise, it can become really difficult. And the other thing is that trust needs to be built from the get-go, because it's 10 times more difficult to come back from processes where trust has been broken, and we see that a lot in ongoing platforms and in different countries where stakeholders don't trust each other. So the work that needs to be done to get them back to square one is much more than the work that you could have that you potentially need to do when you start and in building that trust. So thank you very much. Any other questions or reflections? I think we have a comment from Philomena. In most, oh, sorry, and I thought there was another, oh yes, sorry, Theodore, we missed your comment, our apologies. Siobhan, I think this question is for you, and I can also chip in, but what are the main differences from public and private sector engagement in your experiences?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think I would say from a climate action perspective, which is obviously the field that we're engaged in right now. When speaking to the private sector, I think it helps to have a very, very prepared and clear agenda, and to understand where they're coming from in terms of their motivations to even participate in a program. I think the times that I've had successful engagement in the past, and teams I've worked on have had successful engagements, to come with a very, very clear pitch, to do your homework and to really not waste their time, because I think from my experience, a lot of private sector actors, they've had challenges working with development partners. And from their perspective, they said that, look, we've invested a lot of time in certain relationships, but it's not really led to anything. So getting ahead of that, acknowledging that, this can happen, but getting ahead of that essentially, and talking through how to avoid that and really understand from their perspective is always very helpful. And I think that's different when we're talking to the public sector, that there isn't that same kind of challenge. At times it could be, it can be difficult to get them on the same page in terms of the need to involve private sector actors. Sometimes there are a lot of different public sector actors involved, and having very streamlined communication can be a challenge. So I would say these are some of the differences in engagement that I've experienced. Over.
Thank you, Siobhan. Just to complement from my side, I would say other differences as well. We tend to see that the power dynamics are present in both sectors, but are very different in terms of the nature that triggers the power dynamics. In many countries, also public sector tends to be much more volatile and unstable in terms of the rotation of public officers and the speed of response is also very different. But we normally tend to see that it is a challenge to engage both public and private sectors overall. It's just that the reasons why that's challenging are different, and so yeah, it's good to have a I would say a deep dive into both sectors separately, and I think your guide, Siobhan, is very, very useful in that sense. We've got a comment from Philomena. Siobhan, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it. It says in most SIDS, in particular the Pacific SIDS, private sector is so small, and you will find that a lot of private sector stakeholders wear different hats. For example, most of public sector stakeholders own and operate businesses in different sectors. Very interesting. Tourism, agriculture, fisheries, etc. And at the same time, they also represent their communities. So I'm wondering, what are the common challenges in engaging private sector? And I can see you smile, Siobhan. So I guess you've got some interesting insights to share there.
Well, I'm also smiling because it's a great question, and I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I think that the conflict of interest sometimes that exists between the public and private sector, it's a very difficult one to untangle in certain contexts, and I don't think there's an easy answer for that. A lot depends on local regulatory contexts and such, but I think I did touch on a few of the different challenges in my previous response in terms of engaging the private sector, and I will say that, and I think Nimosima had a very good point that they're swift and adaptive, but to give them the opportunity to be swift and adapted, I think the challenges that we've had is in convincing the private sector that it's worth the time in terms of the resources, the time and investment to kind of build something with public sector actors. We can have a lot of contexts, whether it be SIDS or LDCs. The public-private sector collaboration is nascent, or it hasn't really gone as everyone would have hoped. And so that also comes back to the point of building that trust. That's where I think certain agencies, development agencies, can be that bridge between these two actors. But I think, making sure that the private sector is not dismissive of these kind of these overtures from public sector and development organizations has to be done by understanding, honestly, what is in it for them in terms of business operations, in terms of interest. There needs to be something in it for them as well, and trying to find where that overlap is between the public interest and the private sector interest is crucial, and that's something that we really emphasize in our guide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you, everyone. You've been an amazing audience. I'm so grateful for your insights, very thoughtful, reflective questions, and your sharing as well. I'm conscious of time, and we're at the time of closing. So if you have any questions or reflections or insights, of course, we are welcoming those if you have them extra 5 more minutes. And please, if you can take a couple of minutes, Shanali will share on the chat a quick feedback survey on this session. We really hope you found it useful, helpful, and as we said, we're going to follow up with the materials so that you can kickstart your effective collaborative action. Well, not the processes, because I'm sure you're already doing it, but hopefully in a way these materials can help you think things differently, or if you're stuck at some point, help you go through those processes and unstuck any blockages. And we would really, really appreciate if you take 2 or 3 minutes before you disconnect to fill out that survey, because it helps us make these webinars and sessions and the next coming ones as informative and useful and interesting to you as we can. Thank you, Theodore, for your feedback. Yes, we're very much looking forward to the next sessions. Stay tuned. We've got some masterclasses that Shanali is sharing. Actually, tomorrow there's a deep listening masterclass that you can join, and on Thursday there's a systems mapping masterclass, which I would highly recommend you to join because it's led by two system mapping experts, and it's really, really helpful to get that practice of understanding the system and how to conduct system mapping exercises. If you have any questions, we're happy to stay for a few more minutes online, and otherwise, thank you very much for joining, and I really look forward to seeing you again in the next sessions of ECA.